MS Now's Jake Traylor reports from the White House lawn. Also with us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, and here with me, Elise Labott. She is the author of Cosmopolitics on Substack. Jake, the president says that America is locked and loaded. What does he mean? Is he talking about potentially putting boots on the ground?
Yeah, Laura, look, I mean, this is pretty seemingly clear language from the president when he says locked and loaded, not too ambiguous there. And we've seen, obviously, the president take militant action before and seemingly making reference to that here in this Truth Social post, saying that if there's any killing of these peaceful protesters, that he would intervene, come to their rescue, and do just that. It's notable, we don't yet know what the planning or procedurally things are looking like behind the scenes. We don't yet know if there are conversations amongst White House officials or amongst U.S. government officials that are actively looking into ways to intervene in this. But we did, as you noted at the top here, from that top Iranian security official with really a two-pronged message. First, it was directed directly at Donald Trump, saying that if the president chooses to intervene in what's going on there, that it would essentially destabilize the region. The second part of that message from that Iranian security official essentially was to the American people, saying, do know that if Trump decides to do this, that he is really the one that started this adventurism, as he said, in the first place. That, of course, all comes, Laura, against the backdrop of 6 months ago, of course, the president himself striking Iran, a nuclear facility, and then even just this week telling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that if he would support their striking of Iran if Iran continues to build out these nuclear facilities. So a growing and really escalatory and direct language from President Trump towards Iran. Also, as we know that the party that Trump serves, the MAGA party, is continually critical of his intervention in places specifically like Iran, Laura.
Yeah, there were a lot of people that voted for President Trump that may not be happy about those words. But Elise, locked and loaded, does this send a signal to protesters that there may be some protection from the United States?
It's really hard to tell, Laura, because with previous administrations, and these are not the first set of massive protests over the last decade or so, or even 20 years. Previous American presidents have kind of tried to help behind the scenes, didn't want to speak out in favor of the protesters because then they thought it would be labeled an American or an Israeli kind of operation. And that's certainly the danger now. A lot of protesters have said in the past that they don't want an American president to come out loud. But now that the U.S. has already struck Iran 6 months ago with Israel, they don't really know. I don't think anybody really knows. But I do think it is interesting that Ali Larijani said Americans, the president has started this adventurism. As Jake said, this isn't very America first. But I mean, I think we also have to look at President Trump's rhetoric. He's not the first time he's used the locked and loaded phrase. And I think it remains to be seen whether he would go and use military action specifically about the protesters. And there are many other ways he can help the protesters behind the scenes with money, with aid, with opening up the internet. I think this is, a kind of rhetorical warning, but I'm not sure if he'd really use military action.
I want to go back to that adventurism statement that you just mentioned. David, bringing you in because that post from the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council that this would destroy American interests. What does he mean by that?
That's basically empty threats. I mean, this is a corrupt and weak regime, and it's extraordinary the courage that these Iranians are showing to go out again and protest. When this happened years ago, they were shot dead by security forces. But I agree with Elise. What the United States needs to do is support the protest, but help it quietly, connecting the internet using Starlink or any system that would help, images be broadcast to the outside world, help protesters communicate with each other. But talking about strikes inside Iran by the United States does delegitimize these protests. I mean, we tried that across the Middle East, and it's concerning to me. What is the process that the Trump administration is following in Iran? What is the strategy? You have a president of the United States sending out a tweet at 3 a.m. There should be meetings about how different agencies can help these heroic Iranians, not just sort of threats at 3 a.m. from an American president who, I assume is alone in his bedroom in Florida.
Alone in his bedroom, indeed, posting things at 3 a.m. Elise, this isn't the first time this week that the president has made comments towards Iran. I want to play what he had to say on Monday about what happens if Iran tries to rearm. Take a listen.
Now I hear that Iran is trying to build up again, and if they are, we're going to have to knock them down. We'll knock them down. We'll knock the hell out of them, but hopefully that's not happening.
So he's bookending the week with this, essentially, right? That these types of comments towards Iran. He even said he would back Israeli strikes on the country, which we were discussing, if Iran continued its nuclear weapons program. If you're Iran, how are you reading all of this taken together?
Yeah. Well, it used to be that the nuclear program, and not even the nuclear program, a nuclear weapon that was ready to, that was locked and loaded and ready to go, would be the kind of last thing, the red line that American presidents wouldn't cross. And even for President Trump, when he saw that, you know, Iran was moving closer, he supported these Israeli strikes. And I do think he could support them again. Obviously, no one wants a nuclear weapon. Obviously, nobody would be upset to see this Iranian regime go. But, you know, given what you see going on in Venezuela, when the strategic objectives, is it getting rid of Maduro, is it getting rid of narco-terrorists, are unclear. Again, as David said, the strategic objective here is unclear. What are we looking to stop with Iran? Are we looking to stop a nuclear weapon? Are we looking to stop their adventurism in the region with all their proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas? They can cause a lot of damage against U.S. interests. You know, you've seen them launch terrorist attacks against Israeli buses in Europe. Iran can do a lot of damage. So what does the American president want to achieve here? Does he want to get rid of the regime right now? There are a lot of ways he can help do that outside of just military action to support political protests.
Yeah, what is the ultimate goal here, right, David? Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee, told our colleagues on Morning Joe what he finds the most concerning about all of this.
One of the most unsettling and dangerous things that President Trump does is these unhinged tweets at 3 a.m. There have been nights recently where he fires off 100 tweets on a dozen different subjects. And I feel for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. If you were responsible for leading the U.S. military and implementing directives from our commander-in-chief, what would you conclude from that tweet? That we are locked and loaded and ready to go to support Iran's protesters?
You talked about this already, David, that in his bedroom alone, 3 a.m., posting this. How does this type of rhetoric impact our ability to carry out and enforce our national security?
If we don't follow up threats like this with serious military force, more than just drone strikes, it weakens the threat from the United States. Look, just in the last several weeks, we've obviously got continued drone strikes on these drug boats, alleged drug boats in Venezuela, a covert operation on a dock in Venezuela, drone strikes in Nigeria, drone strikes in Somalia, and now we're threatening them in Iran. Air power alone doesn't topple regimes. We saw that in Afghanistan and Iraq, and it's concerning, again, that the president himself is wielding this power, making these decisions himself. A theme of the Trump presidency is the massive expansion of presidential power. So he's right to threaten, to back these protesters, and he's right to threaten the regime. But again, I'd like to see more of a strategy, a plan, an approach by multiple agencies figuring out the best way to support these brave protesters.
Elise, final thought here.
Yeah, and just very quickly, I mean, what happens if the U.S. does push forward and helps get rid of this regime, you know, for the protesters? As David said earlier, there need to be meetings going on in this administration. If regime change is the goal here, it is true. There will be a lot of destabilization in the region. And so the U.S. needs this larger strategy to figure out what its end game in the region is. It would be good for the Iranian regime to be gone, but I don't think this administration has thought for a minute about the consequences of anything like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of mixed messaging about whether or not this is about regime change in Iran or regime change in Venezuela. What exactly is the administration doing here? Jake Traylor, David Road, Elise Labott, thank you.